We're live, so welcome everyone to episode 79 of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Bollin. Today we actually have a returning guest, my friend Jerry Grover. Jerry has been on previously to discuss things like, say, chronology and other aspects of the Book of Mormon. And today he will be discussing his book, Sumerian Roots of Jaredite Derived Names and Terminology in the Book of Mormon. A link to his website where you can download it, as well as like a number of very important books, both by Jerry and also John Sorensen and Brian Stubbs, can be found there as well. So, Jerry, it's been a while since you've been on. So, how about you just give a background to some people who may be new to you? Like, what's your educational background? What got you interested in Book of Mormon studies generally, but also Sumerian roots or Jaredite names specifically, and any other projects you may be working on at the moment?
Okay. Yeah. By training, I guess, if you're worried about my, kind of academic background, I'm a licensed professional geologist. I'm also a licensed professional civil engineer with structural specialty. I also have worked for 30 years as a freelance translator on and off. I guess you could say I'm a linguist. There's kind of two definitions of linguist, some that go to university and get a degree, others if you can speak multiple language or, that kind of thing. And then I worked in translation. So I do have some experience, translating languages. As far as ancient languages, I was always fascinated with just ancient number systems, kind of just as a nerdy engineer. And so I was familiar with a lot of the languages, at least their number systems that, including Sumerian, Proto. Actually, the Proto-Sumerian was kind of interesting because that's a whole different. The Proto-Cuneiform has not really been translated yet, although the number system has kind of been worked out. And there's multiple number systems. Anyway, so that's kind of my background. As far as Book of Mormon studies, I've written quite a few books. My first foray was in 2015. I did geology of the Book of Mormon. And we'll actually talk a little bit about a few of these items in this context of discussion, bringing in some of my other research that actually kind of has something to do with this Sumerian research. I did ZIF, magic goggles and golden plates. That was basically metallurgy of the plates, and then looking at the etymology of ZIF, that specific word, going back, looking where that came from, what it meant. Did translation of the characters document, both an original version and an updated version. That's been kind of interesting, popular, bit controversial, of course. Kind of my strategy, my approach is I just do scientific and linguistic research and sponsor independent researchers that are doing that, like Brian Stubbs and then Royal Skousen. I've contributed to the original text project, that kind of thing. And so I've kind of specialized maybe in those areas. So I don't really get too much into, you know, um, the other areas like whether the seer stone was used or not used, all these kinds of things. Most of the like historical, I don't really get too much into that, other than as I need to actually do the science that I'm working on. This book, actually, like I say, I've kind of, some people call me the Star Trek researcher, meaning I go where no man has gone before. So I take on topics a lot of times that people don't really, I don't know whether they're scared of them or whether it's just too, difficult or what. But one of the things that you ran across pretty quickly, because in the Ziff book, right, I'm trying to find out the meaning of an unknown um, term, right? And so you're getting into the linguistics, and there's a bunch of other ones of those terms, in the Book of Mormon. So I obviously was looking at those, seeing whether they were, Ziff was there a pattern here? Why do we have these um, unknown, or at least not transliterated um, terms? The other thing is I sponsor Brian Stubbs' work, and so a lot of questions came up related to that, meaning and we'll kind of get into that, but the Book of Mormon, the names don't reflect what you'd expect in historical linguistics. I mean, they're not changing over time, um, both the morphemes or even the full names. So something is going on here, a little different than what we think would be expected in, language, especially Jaredite languages that may 3,000 years time depth or something, over the history of the Book of Mormon, and because some of the names in there are the same as later, right? So, um, Nehor, those kinds of things. So there are kind of these interesting linguistic questions. Nephi had always been one I was thought that doesn't quite make sense the way it's written, because your PH, the F sound is not derived from Hebrew or anything. That comes from Greek, Latin into English. So why would they use that? Now we know that it is an F sound because of Nefer. We kind of figured out um, that's the Egyptian root of it, right? So they just kind of, I mean, I'm not really an apologist, so I don't wait. I'm not trying to like answer all these critics' questions. I have my own questions that interest me, and that's what I research. I just kind of usually ignore them unless they raise a question that's somewhere of interest. So that's kind of how I got into working on the book. Now, it is a 780 page book. I better warn them before they click through the link. So but
As someone, as maybe like only like one or two people in the entire world who's read it cover to cover, it's riveting reading.
yeah. But one thing, it's a lot of my research is voluminous because I actually try to put in pathways often that are not productive, right? Meaning I don't want people, if I'm doing all this research, I don't want people to try to go down the same path, maybe the same dead end I went on in certain areas, right? So sometimes it gets voluminous. The other thing is I started working on it and I decided, I'm just going to treat every name in the Book of Mormon. I'm also going to do like a little bit of research in Hebrew and other things while I'm at it, right? To see whether there was matching up. So I actually, and we'll get into that. Actually, in the book, there's other Book of Mormon names, and I think I found new Hebraic um, sources for, Um, now, one of the things is I took it on because for years, I mean, really, everyone has been trying to find old world names, right, in the Book of Mormon, and mostly from an apologetic standpoint, right? So if we can find these, that somehow, gives more verification that the Book of Mormon is an ancient text, right? And so, but which is worthwhile, but I didn't approach it from that standpoint of trying to prove the Book of Mormon by using these names. I was like, maybe there's something going on with these names that might be happening in Mesoamerica or something through this time. There's also maybe something in the translation process, obviously. So, um, why are they being treated in this standardized way? And that was kind of my conclusion, is that there's been a standardization of these names. They're not giving us, the actual phonetic representation of a Jaredite name at, 2100 BC, right? And one of the questions is so nobody really made any progress in Jaredite names. If you go to the Book of Mormon Onomasticon, it just says, well, we don't know. They just punt, right?
Yeah, the only thing that really came to mind that was like sustained was like Tretnos's studying the 70s on phonemes and stuff like that related to Jaredite names.
Right. And so I said, okay, again, I'm an engineer, right? So it's like, okay, you have this approach. If what you're looking at, if I'm trying to analyze something and none of the models I'm using are working, well, that probably means I need to maybe take a different approach, right? So I thought, okay, maybe just going to the old world and trying to find names isn't really productive for the Jared, hasn't been productive for the Jaredite. So we're maybe looking at something different, right? Um, and so my approach was, okay, we have clues that it's Sumer, right, is where they originated from, kind of your, Great Tower, and just culturally from that time frame. That seems to be the point of origin. There were other clues that I had kind of from the characters document. There seems to be two numbers that match the proto-cuneiform of like 2600 BC. Um, so I'm just saying that seems to be a logical place, to start. And there are a few like Kish, even though it exists in the Bible. That's basically a city in Mesopotamia, right? We have a king named that. So there were clues, right, that we're probably looking at that was at least the original language or something similar Elamite or something from that area, right? So so that's where I thought, okay, I will start looking. And as I had been doing Ziff, I'd actually kind of looked at Curelom and QMOM, and those seemed to actually I could find something that um, was meaningful there that seemed to match animals, that you would have expected. So that's why I thought, okay, I'm just going to start working on this. And it took months and months and mindless. And so the approach I took is I said, you know what? I don't know how I don't, meaning Sumerian isn't a agglutinized language. We know that the Book of Mormon names are metonymic, right? They mean something. Most every one that we've been able to figure out, looked at, was that way, or either it's a biblical typology. Sometimes you get that, right? So it's sort of taking something out of the Bible. And I dealt with that in one of my books on Shul, where I had, Ogath, right? It has Og and Gath, and both are giants, both get beheaded, right? This place of Ogath. So there's biblical typology in addition to maybe some underlying meaning of how the names can get structured to mean something. So the basic approach is, well, I don't know. I'm not going to assume I even know syllables, or I'm looking at this English representation of a name. So I just, I don't know, because they're probably underlying glyphs, right? And so they may not be phonetically structured. It may just be a glyph form, which may actually help explain why phonetics is not as important if it ends up being more ideographic, right? Or something. So I'm just saying, I'm keeping an open mind as when I'm cutting this name up, looking for sources of it, that I'm looking at each letter as a word, every two letters as a word, three letters. So I actually just went through systematically and just cut up each name and looked to see whether I could find in Sumerian. I use standard Sumerian, the Pennsylvania Sumerian dictionary. It wasn't like, channeling some revelation or something like that. Just very academic, because I'm just going to use a standard resource, you know. Um, so that was my approach, and we'll kind of see where I got, whether I made any progress, or whether, it's 780 pages of a paperweight or something. So anyway, that's kind of I don't know if you have any other questions about my background or anything, but.
No, I think that's pretty good. And also, I think we kind of discussed this in person. That you brought this out in your books before, but I'm sure like some will be wondering when it comes to say the people who are named in the Book of Mormon. Do you think that's their given names, or do you think it's a name given to them by a later editor of the text?
Well, I think it's kind of clear. You have like layman means unbeliever, right? So nobody's going to name their kid that. At least Lehi probably wouldn't. I think there's a few possibilities that they either were renamed, as it happens in Mesoamerican, also a lot of other Native American, is sometimes they reach a certain age of maturity, they receive a different name. Sometimes it's a name given at the end of their life based on their exploits. It can be after the fact, right? If you have a story that gets retold, the Old Testament has metonymic names too. I mean, Jacob means trickster, right? I don't think that was the intent, of naming him trickster. That seems to be, and then it was changed, Israel. So we see that it's a Hebrew practice, right? It's not unique to the Book of Mormon, isn't unique in that way, but. And I also think it's possible that even the translator themselves um, fiddled with the name, and we'll get into that with like the Nephi, the F and the PH, that the divine translator did a little fiddling to ferret out, or some of the underlying meaning of the name in the glyph form or in the phonetics. The other thing I recognize is, you're looking at, there was a statement, that the brother Jared, his language was mighty. I mean, they're obviously seeing something in his written work. They obviously didn't hear him, that they think is something, I guess you'd say, more powerful, or something. They're able to do things with the Jaredite language as they know it, and they had the record of the brother Jared. It's not really plates, right? It was just as a record, um, and they had ether, which I don't think probably had. That was probably a Mesoamerican language. It wasn't, cuneiform or anything like that. And and actually, kind of one of the descriptions that Charles Anthon gives of natural things, and that seems to be more of the what you'd expect of the Olmec, right? So I guess what I'm saying is I'm looking at um, there's some possibilities there that this language may have features about it that make it more able to express things than Mormon or Moroni were used to in Reformed Egyptian or Hebrew, right? They're saying something that there's something more about this language that they find powerful.
Well, of course, like I linked to the book below so people actually can go through it. But of course, you have a presentation. So what I'll do is like I'll go put myself in the background. I'll let you present, and we can see if there's any questions from the audience afterwards.
Okay, great. Okay. Is the screen share showing up there? No.
Yeah, I can see it. Sumerian roots of Jaredite derived names. So
Okay,
that's perfect.
great. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's just get started. The and there's going to be a lot of text here. I'm not going to read it. I'm just not reading it. It's just there so if people want to like afterward go through the podcast and see kind of where read sections if they'd like. Then um, uh, we can do that. So, oop, it's not advancing. What's going on? Okay. So kind of as I mentioned, there had been little progress. We kind of know generally probably where they came from. Um, the Book of Mormon onomasticon, which maybe your viewers don't know, but that's actually like kind of a BYU sponsored, or at least it's on BYU a web page where they've tried to like take all the Book of Mormon names and try to find meanings and etymologies of them. And kind of this is the statement. They just say that unless possible affinities for Jaredite names can be determined, all suggestions must remain speculative more than substantive. And I would say that, kind of my approach was I'm going to look at this. Now, if I can show with this approach that the model I'm showing works, then that would be, I recognize I've got to kind of establish enough data to show that it maybe this is what's going on with these names, right? So I recognize that I also am under the same burden, right? I've got to go out and kind of show how this works and whether the approach produces a reasonable amount of what you might expect. Um, and one of the things is they talk about language affinities. There really haven't been any studies other than like Ashmont, who was a critic of the church or of the Book of Mormon, um, to kind of look at them and say, where does it look like they came from, right? So we've got to approach that first to see, okay, is there a language that at least phonologically would fit? Um, there are also some kind of well-established premises that are helpful here for on the unknown words. And then again, we mentioned this. Most or perhaps all the Book of Mormon names are metonymic. Um, we do have the actual glosses, which is the meaning of the name given to us. It's on certain of them in the Book of Mormon. So we know this is a practice um, that they were aware of. Um, some of the seemingly Jaredite names have obvious biblical or Hebrew meanings or constructs like Ogath and Levi. We know the Nephites renamed Jaredite locations. Cumorah renamed, the original name was Ramah. So we may have a mixture, meaning it may not be every Jaredite name is actually Jaredite. It may be the Hebrew name given to particular place or something because they were in the land northward as well later. I spent a lot of, they were there for 400 or 500 years. So you have to be a little bit careful that, okay, maybe we're looking at a name given, and there may be some underlying reason. why they did that. Um, One thing I'm saying, kind of proposing, and it's not just unique to the Sumerian, is the names in the Book of Mormon have been phonetically standardized, meaning they do not reflect the expected linguistic sound shifting through long periods of time. Um, they also do not um, experience, even though names are more resistance to sound shifting, which happens in historical linguistics, there really isn't any that we can see. So it's pretty clear that the translator has standardized to Biblical Hebrew. I'm proposing it's standardized to a constructed Sumerian etymology that maybe matches Mesoamerican naming or structures of how they named things. Um, and there's Egyptian too. You also have some Greek in there, so that again there would be standardization to the extent there were some Greek names in there. So, and Skousen has kind of proposed, not with the names, that he does think that the translation was managed, as he says, with the early modern English and things like that. So, anyway, that's kind of what seems to be happening with the names. And then we have Jaredite names that are later used. So they actually made it up through um, some of them into the Nephite, um, probably through the people of Mulek, right? Um, the names in the Book of Mormon are metonymic. This is one of their first points, is that this is not me arguing this. This was long known. And that they have particular meanings describing the features of the individual or place. Um, and he gave the example of the biblical text name Nabal, which means fool. In David's flight, nobody's going to give somebody named that, right? It's not a birth name. And I said, since the pursuit of Jaredite names mostly been fruitless, that's one reason my book is free. So if you don't think it's worth anything, my approach, then you haven't paid anything for it, right? I did think that the premise that Sumerian was a good candidate language for the Jaredite names. These are my premises that the names are metonymic, so I can test them, at least the ones that we know very much about. So that would be a test to see whether this approach is correct, meaning if the name can be constructed and it meets the something about the features. Some names we know roughly what it means, and then and I kind of say there may have been a change in the structure. So that's pretty obvious. Meaning, if it came from Sumer, people have looked there for these names and haven't found them in the old world. So I'm kind of saying, we're if in fact the origin is there, they're going to be structured perhaps differently. Um, so one of the first criterion, in evaluating these Jaredite names, which really hadn't much been done on it, is does it compare phonetically, right? So we have all these Jaredite names, and then we look at a language. Um, so question is, do the phonetics match, or at least is the Jaredite names a subset? Meaning, I wouldn't necessarily expect that every Sumerian sound or phonetic sound is reflected in Jaredite names. If I had, 5,000 pages of Jaredite text, then we could say, look at that. But at least if the Jaredite names are a subset, that would satisfy what the expectation is, meaning the phonetics. Um, and so, for example, like Z, is so infrequently used in English, I don't know that I would expect to find a Z in a bunch of English names, um, as a comparison. You eventually would, as you got enough names and things looked at. But so, um, Sumerian is a kind of a peculiar language because it's not only a dead language, but it was um, already kind of dead uh, at the time. It was actually the phonetics became known because it was actually um, they've constructed it based on Akkadian. So Akkadian did use Sumerian in some of its literature and other things. So it wasn't really, we don't really have a documentation of the phonetics. So the phonetics had to be reconstructed through Akkadian, if that makes sense. Um, and this is kind of just a discussion of that. This is not me. This is kind of just known research. So knowing that there may be a few difficulties in the phonetics, right? Where we have like an English version of it. There may be a few sounds that are slightly different. We have to recognize that this may be not a perfect match. I mean, all ancient languages are kind of that way a little bit, but just something to keep in mind. And so as we look at it, one of the things is Sumerian words and names are commonly formed by agglutination or compounding. So I'm saying, okay, it may not be the exact Sumerian name, but it seems to be, we may want to look at this and say these are names that are constructed of different morphemes or words that are glued together. And we have, compound words like greenhouse, or we do the same, similar, but not to the extent that they did in Sumerian. So that's a concept I'm saying, okay, I'll keep that in mind. That we're probably looking at a compounding type of thing. So as in evaluating Sumerian as a candidate for a source language, so we look at the complete phonetic sounds, recognize that there are some sounds in Sumerian that are not precisely known, so we got a few difficulties. When looking at the transliteration of the words in Sumerian, is recognized in the Romanized dictionary, and I use the EPSDs, the Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary. It's online; anybody can look at this. So, the version I use is an earlier version. They've since updated it, so there are a couple things that are slightly different. But that if we look at that, the English letters does not include C, F, J, O, Q, V, or X. And then in reviewing definitively Jaredite names, the phonetics are consistent in that all of the Sumerian phonetic elements are letters, with the possible exception of the G with a little hat, G circumflex, are found in Jaredite names. In reverse, as in Sumerian, Jaredite names lack the F, Q, and X. The Jaredite names only have one instance of V, which is in the name Levi. That's clearly a biblical name. So that may just be a result of a translation by Mosiah into the Nephite language, or it could have been there's a king. They may have had some reason to assign a Hebrew name, which I actually explain in a different book in Swords of Shul. So, then I said the Jaredite names include PH, which is I'm kind of saying it does not necessarily equate to an F sound, as a pronunciation could be a P sound followed by an H sound. And I think I have some explanation also for that later on Nephi. But so we have to recognize, okay, we've assumed that, but it may not be correct. So that leaves J, O, and C as the only Jaredite sounds or letters unaccounted for in the phonetics found in the Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary. But J is accepted by academics as being a sound in Sumerian that has been missed in transliteration dictionaries. So that they've kind of recognized that since I think as the dictionaries were standardized. Okay. So the existence of various other consonants has been hypothesized, including J, based on graphic alternations and loans. And so there are other sounds that are listed: two L sounds, two R sounds, two H sounds, two G sounds. So there's actually kind of saying that beyond our Romanized dictionary, there are a few sounds that probably exist. And so it's also been argued among academics that the letter O might have existed, which was kind of concealed by the Akkadian transliteration. which does not distinguish it from the letter U. So I've also got to consider that too, because there's a lot of U's and O's that we're dealing with in the Jaredite name. So I'm just kind of those I decided I could would not they could satisfy one could satisfy the other in a name because we don't know. There's something that they've known it's something that's possible. The letter C in Jaredite names also seems to be equivalent to K, right? In the English when we're looking at English, because what's the different pronunciation of K and C? Well, C has some different ones, but your K is a hard C sound. So, but there was a recent publication that was trying to look at Sumerian because it's kind of an isolate language, meaning it's not part of a language family of any other languages, but some have proposed that it has links to the Uralic language family. And there was identified a phonetic K and a tonal K. So that would possibly give you the explanation as to why you have a C's and K's occurring in the Jaredite names. Um, so in summary, the Jaredite names and the Sumerian appear to be consistent with each other in phonetic compatibility. So it's a good candidate for a source of Jaredite name. So it kind of passes that first test. The other thing is that because you have, assuming that the premise that the names are metonymic and also recognize that many Jaredite names are used for multiple individuals with different levels of righteousness and characteristics, and also some sharing with place names, the underlying source language must have a significant number of homonyms in order to construct these identical names that have different underlying meanings. So I don't know, Robert, if that is clear, but um, it's kind of saying you're needing a language that has a bit of capability of, of describing completely different individuals. If your presumption is that it's metonymic, is just not some name that's given, that it actually is trying to describe that individual, and you have people with similar names, you can get that, from there are names that are in the Bible. For example, I did a paper on Noah where you actually the feminine version of Noah, which is in the Bible, means the roots are staggered, drunken, that kind of thing. So you have the righteous prophet Noah, which I think means comfort or something like that. But then you have this other Noah. So it's actually a totally different underlying phonetic name, even though it looks the same and spelled in the Book of Mormon. So you have to, in order to get that, you have to have these underlying homonyms or at least similarly constructed names that mean different things. Um, so kind of my approach to the constructed, I just call them constructed Sumerian names for lack of a better term, but is kind of, since we know the names are metonymic, um, if there's a Jaredite person or name that we know information from the text, we can see if the name can be constructed by compounding the Sumerian words to form the name. In the process of compounding from a phonetic standpoint, where letters overlap with the same sound, the beginning or ending of another word being compounded, the duplicate letter may be dropped. Now, this is not atypical, as happens in languages, right, when they're compounding words. And so an example, if I was to construct a word for cheap plates, it's not a word, but you could drop one of the P's, right? It's because it's a duplicative letter. So I designate those in my constructed names by, when I'm showing you kind of how you can construct them, I bold it. Um, and sometimes you can have a full word fit into the name. And so, like, for example, you have English smart and art. If you have a layered meaning in that name of, you could have smart, it means smart. You could also have it mean art. So they could actually have multiple levels of meaning. And then again, I bold those letters. If it's dropped, if there's a letter that's common or at the end of a word or something, then I just put it in parentheses. So that's kind of the my orthography, if you want to call it that. So, um, so let's kind of get started. So the approach is, let's take Jaredite names where we know the meaning, and then the next will be names where we have an idea of what it means. Ziph, I mean, Curulum and Cumom, for example, those are some kind of animal, right? I mean, it's a list of things. We're told that they're animals. They were useful to man. But we'll take these first. Now, um, so you have Urbana, Alma, 1831, and my pronunciation is just going to be. That's one thing people don't realize that when people use the names in the Book of Mormon, we don't really have a revelation as to how they're pronounced. Now, there's been committees meet and try to standardize it, but so when you say a name, it's just your kind of guess at the English phonetics, right? So I just want to make that clear that if somebody's pronouncing it different, like I work a lot with the Bickertonites, the Church of Jesus Christ out of Pennsylvania. Well, they didn't have all those constructs, phonetic constructs that were later. We have a list in the Book of Mormon pronunciation guide. So, they pronounce, it's not ether, they're ether. It's not that they're incorrect. It's just that was a different, you know, it didn't have different history. So anyway, we got Rabbana, which is interpreted, and the scripture says a powerful or great king, considering their kings to be powerful. This is talking to Ammon. So these are the Lamanites talking to Ammon. And if you go to the Sumerian, Rabbianim, commander, high official, A, strength, power, and HE means be it or be he. So the constructed meaning there is the compound word Rabbianim, and then you can see where I put the parentheses dropping, and then it's pretty close. So I'm saying that one pretty well works. Then you've got Ariantum, which that's kind of interesting because that's in First Nephi. And so one of the questions is why would they be using this? And this is one that hasn't really got a great construct in Hebrew that they've been able to figure out. But it's, Nephi wrote this, he did the plates 30 years after arrival. At least in the Mesoamerican model, he's down on the Pacific coast somewhere, first, when they first landed. Well, they first landed and then they traveled and then they would land of first inheritance. And that's what they say is on the Pacific coast. And we do have Olmec culture down in that area. So there's, the locals maybe spoke something similar. But anyway, the other thing is I actually have a paper where I think the small plates were actually, we have a Reformed Egyptian interpreted version of them. That's in the plate stack. And there's some evidence of that. But anyway, so let's go to this. So you have Iriantum being interpreted as many waters. So you go to the Sumerian, Ir mighty, Ari that, water, upper and high, Tom to be bright, pure, clean. So you end up with Iriantum, what actually matches if you combine all those. Now, one thing that if you go into the book, I couldn't recreate it because it'd be too many pages, but that is kind of one argument you could make. It's some of these, because Sumerian has so many, like the letter U, the word U has a lot of different meanings. You can have a lot of different constructions potentially and get to where it actually has the right number. The spelling is matching all these different words. So it's just as my best construct of it. That's one criticism. It's like, okay, if there's so many of these, then maybe you could just make any word you want. But not all of them have that. And so I actually say that in the book. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just saying that, yeah, that's an argument that can be made. But certain of them are complex enough and really don't have a lot of too many potential source words from Sumerian that you can look at those and kind of see whether it works there too. So Onida, which the original manuscript, printer's manuscript, having to change that spelling from just Onidah. It's a place of arms, right? Um, that's what Alma 47 says. If you take that, you can construct something that matches that meaning arm, weapon, spadix, it's the shape of javelin, estate. Um, One thing I've done too is if you'll notice, like on this leave to go out, the letter E, there's other forms in Sumerian of that where, and the little threes, that's the way they designate the glyphs. Um, the and then if you see something in capital, it's basically a complete ideogram. So it's not really a phonetic construction. Anyway, just trying to let you know. So the one that has that little E with a three and I3, those are just different forms of the technically letter, I guess, if you want to refer to it that way. So that one, at least it's close to the meaning. Ripley Ancom, another one where under the Book of Mormon Mesoamerican models, it's clear up in the north. Basically, that's where Coriantumr and the battles goes, and they fought a battle there. He got wounded, and they came back to Cumorah. So if you take that to be distant, to pour out, surpassing, to be strong, massive, that has water terms, branch, flooding, to stretch out, upper spread discharge. So you do have construction that matches, at least has the elements of what is said to mean. Deseret. This actually is one that is looked at by Hugh Nibley in the Egyptian. We don't really have, of course, it's honeybees. We don't. There's not a word for bee found yet in Sumerian, but they know it exists because you have the word for honey, beekeeper, honeycomb, and then it was used in rituals. So, and this one, if you construct it, the Hebrew is kind of swarms of bees. If I don't think I put that here, but you have to carry to sting a bug um, to leave. So it's basically when they carried the bees with them, stinging bug. And it is kind of interesting because in Mesoamerica they have bees, but they're stingless. So they may have had to tell them that when they constructed this word that it was actually they stung. Now we're going to get into the metrological system, which basically you find in Alma where he's telling you the measures of gold and silver, they're comparative to the commodity exchange system. The base, and this is something people get wrong all the time, is you're looking at a commodity exchange system. The term money can mean anything in exchange. So people says, "Oh, these coin, what is this?" And they're using gold and silver in the marketplace. It's like, no, the commodity, the main commodity against what other things are measured is grain, probably the barley. And so, and when I say barley, there was a different grain than standard barley, but um, so you have to kind of keep that in mind that these one reason he may have listed them is it probably wasn't all that common knowledge because gold and silver, it wasn't like they were using gold and silver in the marketplace. It was very kind of a elite item, pretty rare. And so, anyway, so we'll go through these and and if you lay out the system, the meaning is for limna is it's equal to 7 measures of grain. You look at the Sumerian laws to weigh, imina means 7. So I would say that actually is a pretty good match. Antai is, and again, the system is discussed as being modified to meet the needs of the people, and that's after they went into where the Mulek people be like, and you don't recognize a lot of people. It was like they were totally outnumbered. It was like more than 2 to 1 probably of people of the people of Zarahemla versus the Nephites that fled with Mosiah. So they're they're kind of just adopting or acknowledging that this system that exists. So it's not really, you wouldn't expect it to be a Hebrew-based system. There may be some elements similar, but um, so then you have Ontai, um, which is great as them all, upper Anta to be high. And meaning you got to remember that the O can be represented as an A or U in Sumerian phonetic. So that's one that matches pretty well. Um, Leahona, this is one found by Nephi still in the Old World, but it is one that is kind of interesting. Again, it's similar to what I mentioned in the um, Ariantum, is it's not mentioned until later, the name of it, meaning it's only called the ball or compass by Nephi. It's never called a Leahona. So this happens way later. So we may be looking at a later name given to that. Um, anyway, so you can see, the way it's constructed law, um, I for oil, but that indicates a priestly function, even in the Sumerian. Power, heaven, on as a kind of metal. They interpret it as tin or lead, but um, honestly, the terms for metals were pretty fungible, if you want to, meaning they could have been brass or anything. So, because brass didn't exist in Sumerian, even though they had brass, but the word was not used. So it could be a reasonable substitute. Okay, so those were names where we kind of had a name given, what the meaning was. Um, then let's go to the ones where we have an idea of the meaning, right? So Kirilam and Qumam. So Kirilam is Kuriliam, which would means basically a mountain sheep. Um, Kumam, plow, beast. So the likely being referred to as alpacas and llamas there. And these are the Jaredite names for them. So that's one thing. The Nephites maybe had different names. I mean, they maybe called the llama a horse, for example. I mean, it's because the Jaredites, the Nephites didn't really have access to the Jaredite records till way long time after arrival. So they would have probably already established what they were calling things. Gazelem. Now, this is interesting because this has a lot of different interpretations. Some people talk, well, this is the seer stone, Joseph Smith. I think the approach, if you actually look at what the surrounding text, it's talking about the interpreters. So I think that Gazelem is one of the stones, the interpreter's stones. And it's probably, it's kind of like how could Joseph Smith actually like translate an individual character, which we know he did it, at least initially. We have 4 examples of them. Probably, maybe one of the stones you would actually look, place it on the magnify, because it says magnify before our eyes, on the character, and then in the other stone would appear the meaning, for example. So the stone, I think it's one of the interpreter stones, is Gazal's wisdom, understanding, hearing, lum to shine, Zal to shine, gem. So again, it's a pretty good name for the divinatory stones, the interpreter stones. Um, Ramiemptum. Um, sorry, I should have put another parenthesis there, but again, this is when the missionaries went to the Zoramites, it was practicing an apostate religion. They elevated place in the center of their synagogue where they could recite the prayer was called the Ramiemptum. And this is a long word, so you have a lot of different possibilities, but you have to be pure, being divine, temple room, to speak, voice cry, to praise, cellar chamber, the lower course of the chamber, to be pure, suitable, acceptable. Because they prayed, the prayer was that they were so great. They were so thankful they were so great, which I've heard a few prayers like that even now. Sheem and Nias, so these are agricultural seeds, plants, probably seeds, but is noted in Mosiah 9 when discussing that they had commenced to plant neighborhood of Valley of Guatemala. And this is not really, I'm not the first to come up with this, that the she, and actually as we get into the more of the grain system, where we didn't have an indication of the meaning of that particular metrological term, is that's the word for barley grain, a unit of weight in Sumerian. So the Shia, and you see that in the metrological system, we'll see quite a bit of that. So it's a grain. Shiam, actually, one of the forms of Shia in Sumerian is Shiam, so it's a pretty good match. Um, I kind of propose possibilities for Shiam in Mesoamerica. I did another podcast on Murph and Mormonism recently, fleshing that out better. Nias, you have designation of trees to sow, qualification of grain. So you have Nias. I think probably candidate for that might be chili pepper or Mesoamerican kind of bush tree forms. Somebody has pointed out that this one perhaps has some Miche for the worm for chili pepper is niche. It's probably the only one I think you could even argue has any Mesoamerican phonetics to it. So um, Ziff, I actually discussed that. It's a fake metal. There is it's not really used in a Jaredite context, so I don't know that I would expect it to be Jaredite. There is some kind of construction that has some validity, I think, but it's only used for Noah when it's only mentioned with Noah, and it's basically the meaning's fake metal. So you have Noah the fake king and Benjamin the real king. You kind of this contrast going on in the Book of Mormon there, so it's consistent. So let's go to the additional measurements. So again, this is something, well, we didn't have a complete gloss to it, but we kind of know we're kind of what to we might expect some sort of measuring related terms. And you have the SHU basket, grain, shum. So, and the S with the little upside down hat is pronounced, I forgot to mention that on she, is actually the SH sound in English. Um, Xi'an, same thing. Uh, you kind of have that, or Xi'an, not Xi'an, but it kind of has, so the SH doesn't match perfectly, but you actually seem to match pretty well with the Ani constructed um, name again. The Anteon, again, you're kind of riffing off of Anta, which we talked about. Upper, it's a container for oil, grain, and to be high. Um, C9, which Alma 7 says equal to a C9 of gold, and either for a measure of barley and also for every kind of grain. And so you have again, you have the SH, which doesn't match perfectly with the C9, but you do have the Seni matches. Is Sheni, but it has a designation of silver at the end, the NE, so that is consistent as constructing it. You've got Ezram. Use Ezram. I mean, again, this is another original text, printed manuscript, different. But you have Izu Rum, so it's measure grain with a stick. Rum means perfect, ideal, so you can construct that pretty close. Um, Amnor, again, you have a mini, which is cell or chamber, like as a volume metric. And that's the other thing is in Mesoamerica, they use volumetric measurements. They weren't weighing things. So it's pretty clear we're looking at volumetric terms, not weights. Um, and they, they're it's not like saying they couldn't, but there's no evidence of it at this point. Uh, anyway, so you have Amnor again, chamber grain, abundant. Senum, again, you have the SH not matching perfectly. It seems to have been dropped. Uh, but again, it's to measure, um, and you have basically Senim, Shenim, which is a measurement of grain or barley. That's one of the terms in Sumerian that matches. Shiblon, again, you have the she sound. Ib means middle. um, to half. It's a mathematical conversion, ball, mathematical conversion to way. Then it tells us a shiblon is equal to half a measure. So the Sumerian etymology of ib, middle, iba, ration, and ba, half is exactly correct. Um, Skousen thinks that there may be an error there, but I think in the spelling, but I think maybe it's on the shillum and shiblum. So I'm using the Skousens. And so then you have barley, grain, ilza, basket, lum is a small kind of vessel, drinking vessel, again, volumetric, potential volumetric measurement. And the kind of the last one, Leah, slaws to weigh out. This is the one maybe, or they use a weight term to incorporate into their volumetric system, but barley measure with the stick and Oz dried, so dried grain, something like that. Okay, and I just want to summarize the Sumerian grain measurement, other systems is it's a lot different than what we they had different systems great for terms. They did not have uniformity, so it was basically based on the item that they're talking about, whether it's sheep or grain or something else. I mean, they had different terminology. It wasn't like a standardized measurement system like pounds or something like that. So, um, and this is kind of well, it's just showing you that they're different. These are the glyph forms. So you have the she system, different ones of the grains, were measured a little differently. There's a calendrical one. So it's just giving you kind of as to why you may have had a, a different measurement system for gold as opposed to silver. They weren't uniform. So you actually had these different systems that they then did their commodity exchange, at least in the Nephite, then they linked it to grain and then kind of had, this one is equal to that in the grain. And then they didn't measure them all against the grain. They had one standardized one and then had its own internal system. Hopefully that's clear what I'm talking about. Okay, so then we have um, names where we can rely on we're differentiating, meaning some people or some places we have information about them. There are clearly some other names, a lot of names we don't know anything really much about them, and I include them all because I said, okay, can I make sure I can at least construct the names where we don't know anything about them in some reasonable, meaningful way. So um, we'll just go through the ones where we actually have some kind of indication story to match. So we have Akish, who was a primarily known evil Jaredite king, instigator of the secret combinations. You have A, strength, wage, power, weapon. Ki is underworld. Kishi is netherworld. Kishi is also secret. So that seems to be consistent. Shellam is the mountain discussed in Ether, where the brother of Jared took the small stones, where you actually kind of had it has temple connotations, right? Because he's the Lord's reaching out with his hand, he's seen his hand, and et cetera, et cetera. There's many people that write a lot about that. So you have Shia to call by name. Actually, here we got a homonym, right? So it can mean grain, but it also means to call by name. Totally different. Temple to enter. Elah is elevation. Elame is the form of the Elah, and Lum means to grow tall or to shine, which is interesting because that's the stones. The shining stones were given to him, and so you can construct Shelam with just one overlap there. Zarin, again, this is another brother Jared time frame said by his faith. The brother Jared said unto the mountain Zarin, remove, and it was removed. If you look at the Sumerian root, Z is dirt, E is to remove, take away, throw down, Na is stone. So the meaning would be dirt remove, stone throw down, and you pretty decent match. You drop the final vowel. Okay. Apologize for like the different font size. Sometimes I'm just trying to fit it in on the slide if there's a lot. So lib. Now this is an interesting one. Um, and I will go into some explanation on this. I'm giving you kind of like all the potential um, ones here that seem to be reasonable, but there's a lot of them. Um, one reason is because there are two individuals that we're going to, there's more than one lib. So you're kind of like, okay, just as I mentioned, you may expect that we have a different construction, that they don't necessarily mean the same thing. Um, First lib was a righteous king and built a great city. He was a mighty hunter. Um, and this is um, heart to be rich and well off. I'm going to talk about this because there's also some meaning that we know from probably where the site, where it's called Laventa, where the city of Lib is. It gives us a little more information. So the word actually is pretty straightforward. The other one was a man of great stature, took by murder, secret combinations, civil war. So, but his is body, heart, angry, to curse, be dazed. So again, you have these homonyms that even like lib has different homonyms. Uh, the one thing I'm going to talk about here is actually the first king, the city of Lib. And so Laventa, that's the city, and there are four. They have the large heads, which depict the rulers there. Um, this is the middle one, interestingly enough, in the um, on the promenade. There's three heads. There's another one further down, but this is the middle head. It's smiling. Everyone's recognized as kind of, they call him the happy ruler, and lib actually in Sumerian means to be happy, well off. Ib means middle. So it actually even matches what's there. Now, this isn't in the, I don't think I have this in the Sumerian book. You have to go to my Swords of Shul, where I actually go through all the heads. Because they actually had not in La Venta, but in San Lorenzo, it was like a promenade where they would actually go around to each of the heads as if they were like, had a story about each. And if you actually take them all in order, you can actually get you can get constructions out of the Sumerian that match their headdresses and stuff. So, and match the name, that the Book of Mormon name to it. So that's a whole nother discussion. And I recognize that's a little bit speculative, but it actually does work, using this concept that I'm discussing here. So, um, yeah, and here I'm showing, this is a picture I took down there. So these are not, they've actually made these out of concrete. They've actually taken the heads to museums, but that middle one is lib on the promenade. Quorum, this is another um, somebody we know something about. Again, that's part of it. Sometimes we don't know very much about them in the Book of Ether as they're going through the kings, but at least often if he's good, a few things he did perhaps. So can we construct something that's quorum to be something good, core to strong, admiration to be abundant, perfect rum. So yes, you can construct quorum. Um, Shez is another example where we have two people with the same name. And so kind of the premise I'm approaching it is that just because they have the same name doesn't mean that the underlying glyphs are the same. And I actually think there's proof of that, like in the Book of Mormon itself, in the Nephi's, for example. So the original text, the 1830 edition, you have just Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi. The first, second, third, and fourth were all added. Those were not on the plates. So it does seem like in order to differentiate them, and even like Nephi, first and second Nephi, it was maybe a different form of Nephi. Perhaps his king, when he became king, he was still called Nephi with had a king designation in there, even though the phonetics, they maybe wrote it differently under the underlying glyph forms. So I do think there's kind of evidence that we do have different, other than like the Noah examples. I mean, I think the actual books in the Book of Mormon would indicate that's a reasonable conclusion. So you have the father, um, uh, who was, I basically just have here, call by name, raise a child, trust man. He was righteous. His son was smitten by a hand of a robber. He rebelled, but was smitten because of exceeding riches, which brought peace to his father. So he's called by name. He was princely, but he's removed. His life was removed. Shul, this is an interesting one. Partly because we have more of his exploits. He went to the hill Ephraim, which I have a whole in my Swords of Shul book. I talk about that likely was a volcano because the Ephraim, meaning of Ephraim means to in Hebrew means to throw things up in the air, spew up in the air, cast lots up in the air. It does sound like a volcano they're talking about. And anyway, there's a whole story behind that. But here's kind of his history. That kind of a summary of his history in Book Ether, because we do have a bit more information about him. So I created these metal swords, which actually my proposal is that's actually when it says the Limhite expedition went and got, they brought back. They thought it was, the Nephites. Why? Because it was the Nephite sacred bundle, right? It had records, it had weapon, it had the sword of Laban. Um, could have even been more swords that Nephi made originally to match it. Um, anyway, so what the Lemhites brought back was really the sacred bundle of the Jaredites, because it actually says they got it from a remnant of the people, not from the people that were destroyed, which matches the Epo-Olmec and Mesoamerican models. But the other thing too is you kind of know that it wasn't like just detritus off of the battlefield, because it said the swords were all cankered, the hilts were gone, where the breastplates, the copper was bright, right? So you have a totally different corrosion pattern. So you would not have expected them, even if made from slightly different materials like copper and steel, then you would not expect they would that differentiation. So it's clear that it was some sort of and it was a testimony, right? That's they're bringing showing that the Nephites were destroyed because here's their sacred bundle. Anyway, so in the Sumerian, you have, Shul means manly, youth, young man. Shelu is a metal. Actually, I have that twice, sorry. Um, then you have old to become bright and shine, kind of related to the metal. Battle, trust. So you can construct um, pretty reasonable um, Shul out of that. Shelem is the mountain. Um, which we discussed. Again, this is of the 16 small stones. Just kind of put that in there twice, but Akish we talked about. I just have a little more information on him there. Shiz, as we know, is the kind of the infamous bad guy at the end, fighting Coriandamer. He gathered half his people, swept through the land. Reasonable etymology for shiz is, shah is to snap off, shay is to call by name, shy is to become tired. It talks about them at the end. They've leaned upon their swords, and after the exhausting battle, cut to move his life. Shem is interesting. Is it's mentioned when Omer passed by the hill Shem. First, it's mentioned there. It's obviously mentioned later when Nephi had to take records out of there and take them over to Cumorah because the Lamanites were getting up into too close to it during one of their um, advances in a battle up into the land northward. Um, it's kind of interesting because I'll get into this. Is where I kind of said we may discuss a little bit of the geology. Shem is a pretty straightforward word. It means a type of basin in Sumerian. Um, And actually, if you lay out kind of the land northward model in Mesoamerica, this kind of shows where you have Rama, which is down here at the bottom, Landmoran, and you have them kind of, this is Omer's route as he went. You have this hill Shem, which actually is a hill that's within a basin. So, and is not very distant from Cumorah, not too distant. So it actually matches the geologic model very well as well. And again, some of this is not in the book. This is in other books. So I'm saying there is other evidence that I think this approach is correct because as I'm applying it across the geology and also geography and other things. Um, Ripley Ancome, this is another one which we talked about already. The reason I'm mentioning it here is because that's where he came from. Further to the north is in the Mesoamerican models is where Coriantumr got injured. Then he came down to Cumorah, so I just kind of included it here because it is close, and that's why it says to be distant. It's clear at the end of the land northward that we know of. Rama is discussed in conjunction with Ogath, meaning this is the hill Cumorah that they final Jaredite battle. It was identified its later name, presumably provided by the Nephites, Cumorah. It was a location where all the records of the Nephites were stored and hidden up, and it's in the land of many waters, rivers, and fountains. So, in the Sumerian, it means you have to beat, to kill, to crush, wage power, weapons, Amma chamber, like a storage chamber for records, Amos to strengthen, Ma to be great. So you can actually construct Rama and pretty reasonable to what the hill was known to be used for and where it was located. And I'm just dealing with Cumorah here, even though it may be I kind of included some that maybe they have Sumerian in because of those land northward stuff. So we really don't have a very good Hebrew etymology for Cumorah, but it means to place down, to be great, to crush, to mangle, defeat, storehouse, storeroom. Again, lots of ruin and defeat there. So that gives you a pretty straightforward construction without really dropped letters or overlaps too much. So Teancum is another name. It's Nephite military leader, but doesn't seem to have very good Hebrew. So I'm looking at it saying, maybe that's got a Sumerian. And his claim to fame was, he was a famous military leader, killed people with the javelin, notably, the leader of the Lamanites, Al-Malachiah, got out. But then he himself was pursued and killed after he did the same thing to Amaron. So if we take a look at that, Tay to Pierce, the E could be arm power. The An is a date spadix, kind of your javelin spike shape. Defeat. Read rope because he actually climbed. It talks about him getting into the city for Amaron, climbing ropes. Let's go to Kish Cumin, another opposite of Tiankin in terms of great guy. Again, we know kind of I didn't really discuss it too much here. We know what he is. He was the leader of the Gadiantans and that kind of thing. And again, you have Underworld, Kish Netherworld, Cute Spread Discharge, Divine Properties, Incantation Spell, Secret, Lord Master, Ruler. So it could be Secret Netherworld, Incantation, Cult, Priest, King that spreads. So it gets a lot of meaning potentially in there. The city of Gimgimno, or Gimgimno, was likely found in the land northward, caused to be sunk. Valleys and the places thereof. There was, again, a wicked, great destruction. It looks like, and because there were hills and valleys in the places thereof, in my geology book, I kind of showed that's post-pyroclastic flow. You get that hills and valleys that we saw in Mount St. Helens. So it looks like this destruction was not it was sunk, but it also had like volcanic activity going on there as part of its destruction. And in Sumerian, to kill, rain, rainstorm, clud, pestle, stone, trachea or uvular throat, kind of figured a volcanic paste or lava. So then there's an Egyptian Gim Gim, which smash, tear up, break. Uh, individual named Gid in the Book of Mormon, chief captain. Again, Sumerian, to kill, to return, pass along, flay, get a lance, spear, to Titan. So that actually is pretty reasonable. Ammoron was an early scribe and historian, son of Omni, of which little is known, except that he kept records during a time which many Nephites were destroyed because of wickedness. Um, Son and descendant, an official, administrative capacity, high person. So you can construct that name straightforward without any drop letters or overlaps. Isabel, this is probably, you know, PG-13 rated slide here, but it's a harlot because Alma the Younger is Coriant and abandoned his mission. It's evocative. You know, in the Hebrew, it's Jezebel. It's derivative of that, is what people are think. You know, that it actually has a biblical typology, but it's to pay for semen, scum, spittle, poison, window opening, withdraw and enter to pay. So anyway, kind of does match paying for a harlot. Siron, that's the land where he went to find Isabel. He was reprimanded. Corianton was reprimanded. Was borders of the Lamanites. Again, it's the Sumerians to be drunk, fret, remember, plunder, smell, scent, sweat. Again, the semen abuse to rise. So reasonable. Zemnariah is a Gadiant robber chief who placed a siege around the people of Nephi. Um, anyway, in the Sumerian, this will go over a couple slides. ZE means dirt or bile. And actually, you have Nephi at the end, the kind of bad Nephite commander who's on the other battlefront than Mormon and is, you know, takes food from starving women and children or whatever. So that's also consistent when you get to that name. Um, then you have these other terms that kind of match scum, throw down. Anyway, so those are ones that where you actually have something known. Now, I'm not including in these slides for the most part, but so I did go through all of the other names where we don't know too much and give examples of those in the book. So that basically what I found is you can construct names for out of Sumerian for actually most Book of Mormon names, even, which is a proposal I'm going to talk about. And that is the punning that they used was not only intra-Hebrew punning, but it was punning across languages, across that they punned into other, into the Sumerian or perhaps into Egyptian, right? So you actually can have a name that has a meaning in both Egyptian, Sumerian, and Hebrew that matches the place. And I kind of saved a few of those here to the end to give that comparison. But there are some additional Hebrew discoveries I made as I was going through. And this is in another book. Actually, this is later discovery, but where we're tying it into Mesoamerica, for example. So you have King Aaron. We know from Maya history, from the stele, there was a guy named Seacock that came in. He was like an Uber king, an overlord king, came into the call and was associated with the Teotihuacanos, which most Mesoamerican models have as representing the source of Gadiantans, or at least the late Gadiantans in terms of when there were battles going on. And anyway, he comes in. He's got a Teotihuacan headdress. He's Maya, probably. We know his glyph. He's mentioned as knocking off in a series of days kings and replacing them. with other kings, sometimes child kings. The Tikal looks like it was probably a son of the leader of Teotihuacan, spear thrower owl. Um, so he's coming in, and it's just 378 AD. So I wrote a book on the chronology. It's basically the year before the final battle, if you um, look at the chronology. And um, this is just going through. Okay, he was a high king, kind of discusses the places where he replaced El Zotes and others. El Peru, spear thrower owl's his father. So then we get down to what his name is, and the glyph form of his name is born of fire, or fire is born. Um, that's kind of what they called him before they figured out the phonetic version of his Mayan name. And interestingly enough, there's his glyph form. Um, in the Book of Mormon, you have a Lamanite king named Aaron, who he's battles initially, just battles an army of him first, and then the later epistles, they don't name him, but they said the king has armies, so it's the same king chronologically. It matches up with the time frame of Mormon. Um, it's also probably the reason why Mormon didn't see it, when they got together for the final battles just a year before over in the Yucatan. They had kind of consolidated all the kingdoms, and that's why when they came, they just ran them over. It was innumerable. I just don't think he saw. He knew they were more than he mentioned. They were numerous before that, but he had really no chance. And then if you go to the formative etymology in the Bible, one of them for Aaron is conceived in flame. So again, we're looking at um, this is not Sumerian, but it's something where you can actually is I don't think we can completely evaluate the names until we know more information about them sometimes. And what this is it's a calc, which they did in Mesoamerica. Calc is where you actually you don't phonetically take the word in. I mean, like in English, we have pizza, right? It's taken from Italian. Well, a calc is you actually take the meaning of the name and put it in your own language. So, so they're not borrowing, they're not loaning in the phonetic version, but they're loaning in the meaning of the name and putting it in um, to mean the same thing in their own language, which is known in Mesoamerica. So, I know in other places too, right? Not just in Mesoamerica, other languages. A couple other ones. This is not in the book, but this is kind of more recent. And I apologize, I spelled Ammon with an A. Um, at the waters of Sebus, he killed 7 attackers, 6 with the sling, 1 by the sword. The Sib with the apostrophe, there's a SB with the apostrophe after it kind of gets swallowed in the quotations. Means an ancient version of the number 7. Boost means subjugate or trample enemies. So that seems to be heretofore, we didn't really have a very good um, etymology for Sebus in Hebrew. I think that matches pretty well. And then Gilgal, another one. Gil's a circle. And that's interesting. The second element, Ga, means close to valley. So it looks like a circular valley. And this one was kind of interesting because it we do have some geographical, and this is in my geology book. We kind of know there's a volcano sits in a fault zone. The book of geology book kind of showed that you had to have both in order to get the destruction mentioned in the third Nephi. You have a concurrent volcanic eruption along with a regional earthquake. And so in Mesoamerica, this is the best candidate. You have a volcano that sits on the fault. Actually, the structure of the volcano is dictated by the fault. So you had an earthquake, and so Gilgal is mentioned in conjunction with that destruction. So you would probably expect it's going to be. So we're looking for a circular valley that's within that zone, and you kind of have it right here. The one to the right, it got 2 arrows. That one, the one on the top's a little bit circular, but this one, the one to the right, Gilgal, that matches pretty much perfectly. Um, and actually, if you use that in the Coriantumr Sherrod conflict. He comes out, he battles, and then he has to go back in where he defeats him. There's a military pinch point right there in that valley, and I've been there. You can't. That valley's remote, but there's no way to get into that thing over the top. So rugged. So the only way in is that throat there, the the little stream that runs out of it. Anyway, so that's pretty good. I think we've got a better etymology for Gilgal. This is starting where you're starting to see pun across multiple language, and this is also Hebrew because Josh is the name of military leader slain in battle. You can get a Sumerian construction for that, even though it's late. It's Mormon. Don't know a ton other than he was just a leader of the 10,000. So, um, but and then you have a Hebrew construction, which can also work. So I'm saying, hey, we're seeing some names that actually can work both ways. And the other is there's a wicked city, Josh, which is destroyed by fire, third Nephi destruction. And again, it's said that the fire was sent down, so it's coming out of a fallout of a pyroclastic flow from a volcanic eruption, it looks like. Um, you can take that, and it does look like it has volcanic terms, paste and cursed and dead, and meaning some of the Sumerian can match it and construct the word Josh. Also Hebrew, Yesh is fire, so that's not me. That's just another, not LDS, but another person looking at Josh. That's an etymology, Hebrew etymology. So same thing, similar. So whether you like the Sumerian construction there or not, that the Hebrew match is pretty good. Then I've got these are ones that are kind of curious in the sense that you can actually look at Ammonihah and you kind of have to understand what's going on in Mesoamerica, um, if you understand. And this is in my book, The Order of Nehor. Horus, and this is not me, this is Book of Onomasticon, indicating that can mean of Horus. Nehor means of Horus. If you look at Mesoamerica, it's equivalent. The head deity is the principal bird deity, and they wear a bird um, mask or headdress or over helmet kind of thing. The same thing in Egypt. They did that with Horus. Horus has four children representing the cardinal points. The principal bird deity has a Bacal that are considered kind of manifestations, four of them representing the cardinal points. They hold up the pillars of heaven just like Horus's kids do. So there's pretty much a pretty good correlation between the Egyptian god form of Horus and Nehor going on here. Um, so then you have Ammonihah, which was, hotbed of Nehor. Um, we're not given uh, there's Ammonihah, who's the founder of the city. So we're not given much of a description of him per se. But if you recognize it, they're talking about the kind of the principal bird deity um, as their religious priest form. You can get bird to be great, rise high, fear aura, scum, spittle poison. Again, you're looking at the Nephite point of view, obviously. So you can get the compound, which powerful, feared, high and great bird priest, scum, poison. He's scum and poison. Um, Hebrew meaning seems to be more applicable to the nature of the city, which is Amam, to dark and dim, to make secret, Haman, the people. So it has a theophoric element, but it's not like in a positive way for Yahweh. It's, to darken or dim the divine name, make secret. So it's actually talking about them being against Yahweh here. And that's not used in a good way. And something like people who darken or make secret the Lord. The Egyptian is kind of interesting because you have the HM. This is an ancient city that was a center of the worship of the deity, which of Kintakem, which is a form of the god Horus. Him is the local name for the falcon god Horus. MN is eternal. HH is a great number. So You could say that, kind of a great city of the eternal Horus is kind of the constructed name in Egyptian of that city name. There's an alternate Sumerian construction you could describe to it: power to burn, great crushing, mangling, screaming, bawling, defeat, spittle, poison, um, and that matches what, so it's great, high and powerful, fear and screaming, crushed and mangled, defeated and burned, place of scum. Um, that's pretty much a pretty good description of the what was given in Alma when the city got mangled, even down to the detail of mangled bodies described in the Book of Mormon. So I also say that's kind of some proof of the course correlation between Mesoamerica and the Book of Mormon. Amlici was a wicked Nephite who um, desired to be king. He got followed, gathered followers. Uh, excuse me. Here we go. And then rejected him. His followers gathered and appointed him king. He wasn't elected, and they took up arms against the remainder of the Nephites, commenced a battle. They went and fled. Um, so again, I mean, the proposal is probably he was of this counter religion, which I wrote a book called per, Evidence of the Order of Nehor in Mesoamerica. So it actually does match. If you look at all the characteristics of the Order of Nehor, it matches pretty well the Maya, even um, in their belief system that we can get out of the Book of Mormon. I mean, you have to kind of see what the missionaries, when they just talk to them, what they said. So here's the Amalekai constructed name. Could be powerful underworld bird priest, pressed with a weapon. Um, and I kind of say it's abundantly clear the native portion of the Noah-syncretic religion and the entire order of Nehor are the Itzamna Bakab complex of Maya gods. Whether that they got that from, the old world Egyptian through the people Mulek or whatever, or whether it just actually matched serendipitously and they chose to call it that because it was so similar to that which they knew. I don't know for sure, but um, then this is kind of gonna talk about some interesting phenomenon that you see is the Sumerian, the HI suffix seems to be related to the plate records because it means to alloy. And if you look at the people that had this name, had this suffix, they all were related to having plates or other records. And other records. So Nephi, all the Nephis had it. Um, Lehi had it. Plates of Limhi had a high. Gadianhi was a record of the secret society of the Gadians. He said he had. Um, Payankai, even though we know that's an Egyptian kind of term, but he actually likely um, held a record as the leader of the secret society that took the name Gadianton not long after Gadianton's execution. Um, so we know there's this set of evil records, or the seal, the oaths, and stuff like that. Cumanon High, I actually am doing some new research where I think I can show that he actually was probably the small plates passed down a different lineage, and I think he probably had them. Xenophi, I don't know about him having records. That's the one, but I do think it may just be the use of a Nephi saying this was the opposite of Nephi. He was this like the Z in the Sumerian. It's a dirt bag, basically a dirt bag Nephi. So, and this is kind of where I kind of get into this. The Nephi itself, we know the Egyptian Nefer, they dropped the R sound. That's not me constructing um, the meaning of Nephi from Egyptian, but we know that's probably correct because of its correlation. It means beautiful in Egyptian, and you can see that when they're talking about Nephi. But the question is, why are they using PH? That the PH for an F. So we know that it's an F sound because of the Egyptian derivation of it. So why are they using PH? That's a Greek, Latin. when you use that in English, that's where that's coming from. But I do think they do that. The translator does that to actually add the HI suffix showing as because it was a plate. So there's something underlying the glyph form there that probably has that perhaps. So anyway, just kind of an interesting um, observation. So that's it for my presentation. Um,
Oh no, that was very informative.
Again, that was a third of the book.
So anyone who listens to this podcast, your homework is to go through the remaining 2/3 of the book.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't developed a test on it to see whether people actually understood it.
no, we
It's
can administer.
interesting. The only comments
We
I've
can.
had on it is, some people that basically an apologist, the new Sumerian says, "Hey, these are not Sumerian names like we know them." I said, "Yeah, that's actually." He never really read the book, and so it's kind of like, yes, this is a different approach, but if I apply the model, if I apply the principles, seems to work, then I think there's something there. Now, whether every one of them is exactly perfect, no, but I do show you using this approach, you can satisfy the criteria, right? It's got to be metonymic. It's got to match the ones that we know the meaning of. It's got to be reasonably matched the ones that we kind of know something about, and then the rest we don't know. The other names we don't know much about, you can still. There's none that you can't really construct that way. So.
Yeah, I was about to say like we can administer like oral Sumerian exams to people, but joking aside, so like how you kind of mentioned like say how one person kind of didn't really understand it, like how else has been received amongst like say LDS apologists and scholars, like has anyone who knows Sumerian or similar languages interacted with it and given any feedback, and
Well,
how
that's
did
what I'm
he
saying.
respond to that?
This individual said, he said, and he's a known apologist, not going to name him, but he basically says, "Hey, I've had 4 semesters of Sumerian, and you know, Kish, yeah." He goes, "These other ones, they're not Sumerian names that I find in the old world." I was like, "Yeah, that's what I'm telling you is I'm not using that hammer, right? You've been hammering on this nail, everybody for 200 years, and it's not working. So I'm trying a different tool, right, to see if we can figure out where these came from or how they were done." And I do show that actually in Mesoamerica, they did kind of this, at least the Aztecs had name construction where they just glommed words together to make a place name. So it's not, uh, it matches kind of where at least I do, Mesoamerica. I don't see anywhere else that makes any sense, to be honest with you, that the Book of Mormon took place. So, but other than that, I mean, I did send it out for peer review, right? This one went to a third party, just paid review, blind. So I didn't know who it was. And obviously it was some Sumerian professor or something. And basically the comment back was, yeah, your use of the Sumerian is correct. Your dictionaries is correct. You're not, there's nothing, your methodology is interesting. But his whole premise was, well, he has no belief in the Book of Mormon. So he just says, well, this is interesting, but doesn't show anything in my opinion. But I didn't care. I was just trying to get, he had some, oh, he had some recommendations. The way I was using the word morphine wasn't quite correct or something. So, which I incorporated into the book. So what I'm saying is I did have review come back, and there were all 3 reviewers. It seemed like really one was really super knowledgeable in Sumerian. The other one, at least I think, knew it. Probably he was just a Near Eastern studies or something. So had some classes in it, but wasn't teaching it, right? But they all recommended, yeah, it was worthy of publication. I mean, they obviously it's way too long for an article anywhere, but so I would say the feedback was, I guess, positive to what I would have expected. Um,
Yeah, that's fine. We
what
do have like a few questions that the audience have submitted. So the first is actually from a friend of mine who actually does know a bunch of languages. So he said, I'd love to dig more into your reasons for how and why Sumerian constructs changed word order between Mesopotamia and the Jaredites in the New World. Where can I read more about the process in your book?
that I didn't, like I say, it's in terms of the order. I think that was for future study. And again, I recognize we only have the data is limited to what names we have, right? And so, and there was multiple ways sometimes of constructing the name. So I don't know whether I could ferret out. I didn't really look at that too closely as to, okay, this is the actual order. I was just saying, can this approach work? And since there are multiple capabilities, as you saw, sometimes I list like, okay, there's three different, and you can put it in different places. I didn't think I really had enough data to actually get into the actual. I mean, of course, the assumption is they did it in some orderly fashion, which, as we know, sometimes names over periods of time, they don't. It's not like the languages always lay down this order. Sometimes they're all over the map, right? So, so yeah, I didn't. You can read the book. I didn't really get too much into that, other than I did kind of say there's kind of the adverb. There's a little adjective form. A little bit I could see, but somebody could look at that. I just haven't had time to get back to it.
Yeah, fair enough. With respect to say your proposals for the etymology and meaning of like kumam and kurellum, someone says like llamas and alpacas are South American animals. How does that fit into current leading theory of Mesoamerica, which I think we would both hold being the area for the Jaredites slash Nephites? Or like, is
Yeah,
there any evidence like say alpacas and llamas in say Central America?
yeah, I kind of actually talked about that, and I did Mormonism and the Murph. I did on anachronisms, right? And I do think the Jaredite names. Of course, I have a different approach on elephants, even though I'm a geologist. But it looks like to me they are actually using the names of the animals that they brought with them, including elephants. I kind of propose that they probably brought them because they were hauling them all over the Mediterranean anyway, in the anciently, you know. So having a juvenile elephant on a boat's nothing new. But then the Curulum and Cumum, those would be ones that they encountered and had to make a name for. Um, there is evidence of llamas in ceramic depictions in the highlands of Guatemala. So that would be consistent. Perhaps there were some in the Tuxtlas. Part of the problem in the Tuxtlas, there's been so many volcanic eruptions. Who knows what was really out there. And then I do kind of were alpacas observed in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Some think wild back in the 1800s. Some think they were introduced. So I kind of propose that it's possible that their range could have gone that far. And again, part of the problem is we don't have a lot of the animal range has changed as civilization happened, right? So um, they, but those were two at least domesticated ones that would match. Could they be something different? I suppose, but it does seem like, and llamas were actually viewed. They've observed on certain locations plowing, being assisting in plowing. So and alpaca, right? There's also kura means loom, wool. So alpacas, they use them for their. So that's why I said they seem to be good matches as far as them fitting in the model. I think we have some evidences of llama. And honestly, I think my personal point of view, based on what we found, is horse probably was maybe what they called a llama when they arrived. I think Nephi, the group landed further to the south. That's where the currents and winds would take them, and then when they journeyed through the wilderness, that have you. So that llama may have been the horse that they're referring to, and so I mean, I have a little different take, but I would say that there is kind of evidence from ceramic depictions of llamas in the highlands in Central America. As far as the alpacas, I don't see that they've observed that. The other thing is that the Jaredites didn't have that many people, right? So it doesn't have to be this humongous range. It could have just been in the Tuxtlas. They were there and survived there as kind of an island, you know, um, population or something like that. They don't have to um, go all the way to the Andes. Sometimes you get island populations of animals where their habitat, because llamas are only above a certain elevation, right? They are adapted to that elevation. So you wouldn't expect them everywhere in Central America, only in the very highlands. Alpaca's similar.
Cool. That's fair enough. This kind of question, it might also touch upon, like, say, how we should interpret, like, say, the Jaredites in the Tower of Babel. So I'll ask it. This might be mentioned in his book, but why do the Jaredite names have Sumerian roots if they spoke the pure Adamic language? I think this would kind of be like a good entree, like, say, how we should interpret, like, say, the Tower of Babel and the differences of languages.
Well, yeah, I did some podcasts in the can with Word Radio on my interpretation of the Tower of Babel and the whole language thing from a
Okay.
scientific standpoint. If you want me, I'll tell you what it is. It's basically because we have the Book of Ether. So it wasn't like the brother Jared all of a sudden was speaking French and they couldn't understand it when it's talking about confounding, right? Because they couldn't, it's not talking about language groups. We get that from, and it only talked about the local people in Ether. It's not talking about the world. That's biblical. And so you're looking at something is happening where they can't understand each other, not language groups. They can't, individual people of the same family, or something's happening. It's also not something that's like this immediate thing because they're praying, right, that it doesn't happen to them. So they're seeing something happening, also the dispersion. And I kind of basically say, Babel, you can actually look at the etymology of that, and it has saturation, flow of water, flood kind of implication. So the theory is possibly what you're looking at is they were building the tower, they had the city in Mesopotamia, right? Probably somewhere in Sumer, I would expect. Then there was some kind of flood event on the Euphrates, which we know happens periodically. um, Not only a fast one, larger over time. As far as explaining why they couldn't understand each other or speak, the only explanation that makes sense to me is basically you're looking at a mosquito-borne encephalitis virus because that actually changes your cognitive ability to understand languages and speak. You can also go deaf. It causes basically brain inflammation. So I actually think that's probably more of a scientific explanation for Babel, which I know is for guys like you in theology, that's, probably anathema, to give a natural explanation for a theological event. But I'm looking at it scientifically. So I'm saying I think they were speaking Sumerian, the whole Adamic language, all of that. I'm just saying I'm not looking at that. I'm just saying from scientifically, I do think they, and it's possible. It says they came. It looks like maybe they had, were closer to the Elamite because it says they came down into the valley. So I don't know that they all spoke Sumer that went, at the Tower of Babel, for example, maybe it's further north, but for them anyway, they came down, and like I said, there's at least a little bit of, at least from my standpoint, there's a little bit of character document evidence of proto-cuneiform from there. So anyway, it matches. Again, these are all way back, so back in history that there's obviously some speculation. But I'm just saying, if you want to take literally the Tower of Babel story, literally meaning to the extent it's obviously literature, and so it's not some sort of history. But if you're looking at the core elements of it, I would explain it that way. So I don't think that they shifted from was Sumerian the Adamic language? Well, I don't know. I guess I I'm open-minded to other interpretations of the Adamic language. I personally don't think that the Aborigines in Australia were speaking the Adamic language. I think it's more of a regional kind of concept and a religious theological concept as opposed to necessarily total linguistic. I don't know if that, again, that's just my riffing off the top of my head based on the
No,
evidence
that's
I'm seeing
good.
linguistically over the world, right? I don't think there was one language over the world that everything developed out of.
No, no, and I would agree with you. Like, I'm not an Earth creationist. I believe the Earth's old and some type of humanized population. So I don't think I don't think you can actually really argue that there was like a single language all people spoke maybe like 4 or 5 thousand years ago. There's a number of problems with that.
Yeah. And so and so the question, I mean, it gets to this issue, is Adam the first man? And so the language that he spoke, everything came from him, or were there other groups? This gets into way beyond. This is Genesis interpretation, right, and things like that. And I have a different
Yeah,
approach.
and pre-Adamites and all that fun stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, right. So I haven't
B.H.
written a book,
Roberts did nothing wrong.
and I didn't write a book on that either. So this is just my observation. So
Fair
don't.
enough. Someone asked also, and this would be like maybe a good time to like plug your chronology book and any future projects you're working on as well. But does Jerry have a preferred dating for the exodus of Jared and his family?
Yeah, for the when he says the date from Jerusalem, is that what he's talking about?
Oh no, the exodus of Jared and his
Oh, the
family.
Jared.
So
Oh, I thought Steve.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I've done on the chronology there, I also had it in my Swords of Shul book, but I refined it a little bit better. Is again, I'm kind of like there's some evidence that there from the cuneiform that there was somewhere around 2500 BC, 2400 BC. I kind of lay out if you kind of look at this these volcanic events where God speaks from the cloud, like a lot of people think that the Sinai is actually a volcano in Western Arabia. That's not me, that's others that have proposed that. The third Nephi event is a volcano speaking from the cloud. It says that they come down and they go north, and then speaks to God in a cloud. And it says the cloud went before them. I do think I can show that there's kind of a series, there were volcanic eruptions at certain points along the journey. Again, a bit speculative. Around that time frame, we do have the Heth event, right? The drought event, which matches up. I think you can match up pretty effectively with the 4K nation or worldwide drought. And actually, we have evidence in Mesoamerica of that very thing in the stalactite, stalagmite studies in caves in Mexico. And also correlating, the animals went south, and we actually don't show that level of drought in Guatemala, in the highlands of Guatemala, that kind of thing. So that gives me a point of reference that that was about 2200 BC. And so if you use the generations before that, roughly assuming, 35 years per king or something like that. It gets you to 2400, 2500 BC. So I'm just saying, I think that is probably about as good as um, I think I'm going to get scientifically and linguistically to, but that's what I think. And it actually, a lot of people don't realize, but um, the rest of it matches too. The rest of the chronology matches the archaeology that we have of the Olmec, et cetera. There's a gap at Riplakish, that is a large gap. That's people don't realize there's not this continuous chronology. There's not a continuous line of kings in Ether. There's a gap. One's a descendant, right? So you have Riplakish, and then so you have a first kind of this floating chronological period. Initially, you have to try to tie in with whatever events you can do. And the second one, you have to tie in. You use archaeology. I use, Shiblon event, the great destruction they had. That looks like all the three volcanoes were erupting at that time frame in that area. And then I kind of tie in the later end of the Jaredites at 400 BC when the Olmec disappeared. You can kind of there's pollen studies there where they've cored, and you can show that the deforestation when that happened exactly pretty close. And then I even get into the bones, the dried bones forensics, what tells you length of time they may have sat if they were undercover. So I've tried to use whatever I can to construct the chronology, and I think it's defendable. And anyway,
So that seems to be all the questions that have been asked by the audience. But before we close, are you working on any forthcoming books or articles or any other projects that you're willing to share?
yeah, I've got one on Zelf, just archaeology of Zelf. I've got another paper on kind of showing in the characters, riffing off the characters document, kind of showing that the glyph for Gadianton is actually there's two other meanings of that glyph. One is spear, one is owl. So it looks like the spear throw owl kind of connection um, in Mesoamerica. I'm working on kind of a background on the Frederick G. Williams character document, kind of putting it, um, looking at, kind of the theme of it. I've worked some with Don Bradley on it, but we're just trying to get the provenance of it down a little bit better. Um, not necessarily looking at the characters themselves, just saying, okay, we got this document. No one's really written anything about it, right? So what is it? Where did it come from? I've got this longer book that is dealing with kind of tracing the sacred relics. I'm looking at other issues like Words of Mormon Bridge, a total different explanation for that. And part of that has to do with um, why was Mormon even allowed to write on the small plates? You know, what qualified him to do that? Because it's limited, only the seat of Jared. And it's also dealing with the farewells of Moroni that they always say, oh, there's these four farewells. It's like, well, they actually correlate with him closing up a record more than they do a farewell type of thing. So that's just a book. And then I'm incorporating some gold plate stuff in there too, because it's talking about the relics. So kind of why the plates were described as greenish. I kind of show the alloy mix that gets you a green gold and stuff. So it's kind of dealing with the relics, but it kind of goes into all kind of different areas. My research, it's not always, I'm not writing a paper, to get tenure. I just do research that interests me, and then kind of sometimes it ties together in a book, right?
Yeah, fair
I don't
enough.
typically typically don't do articles. I usually have them in books just because most of my research is too involved to really do an article on something. So
Of course, there is your Book of Mormon research websites, and that contains like PDFs of your books, as well as like say books by Brian Stubbs, as well as John Sorensen. I see like you have an Ancient American setting and other works by John there as well. So
yeah, I
it's a
have
very good resource.
pretty much every resource. I have Mormon's Codex up there now, so pretty much everything he produced. I was friends with John, and his kids haven't really done anything. So, and Brian Stubbs, I gave him money for help for this research, published his book for him for free, and um, he's working on. He's got the second edition up. We're going to start doing the appendices so you can find things better there. And yeah, I also have an academia page, so sometimes I throw some things up there that I'm working on, like the Zelf thing. And some things maybe there's a few articles there that I really haven't published, but I just throw like units of distance in the Book of Mormon, um, that kind of thing, just small little tidbits, maybe more of a blog kind of thing. But I do them to academics grade. But uh, so you can go to my academia page, and I'm pretty good. It's interesting. I have a lot of activity there. I'm always like top 2 to 3% of activity on that platform, which and get comments there from non-LDS people too. So
Well, this has been informative, and I think it's been a bit different. I mean, there's not many presentations on Sumerian etymologies and Book of Mormon names out there.
thank
So this is
goodness.
real niche. So that's good. I can claim it's the best podcast out there. But
Well,
no,
and again,
thanks
like
to
I'm always open-minded, meaning as some people are always afraid to put material out because they think, oh, it's going to get criticized. I'm like, I try to be thorough, but I feel like in some ways I'm not dissing on academia per se, but sometimes there, and it even happens in Book of Mormon apologetics. I'm not really apologetic, but I do see some people kind of view themselves as the gatekeepers, right? And so, I submitted like an article once to Book of Mormon to BYU, to the book Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, and it was like it came back, said, "Well, we will publish it." This was on the chronology of the epistles, but you have to remove all geography related to Mesoamerica in there. I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that, and so we're not going to publish it then. So it's like, okay, I get it. That group of people did not. I don't even know if they believe the Book of Mormon is historical, to be honest with
I
you.
doubt it.
Right. And so what I'm saying is, it's like I just decided I don't really care to, so there's a lot of, unfortunately, in Book of Mormon studies, there are people that are ego vested. Some view themselves as gatekeepers, all that stuff. I don't care, meaning I'm not publishing for ego. I don't make any money. My books are for free. Um, and I just think there needs to, if we have, whether it's characters document or anything else, if there's something that we don't understand or seems to be not, very well explained, then let's try some approaches and see what we can, if it bears fruit, then okay, maybe there's something to it. And I'm just saying, I think the Sumerian, there's enough. I think I found finding enough kind of correlation that there's something there, whether it's perfect. I don't know that I have enough data to say, yes, this is exactly the way it was done. This is exactly how they construct. This is the way the divine translator did it. But I do think it does explain, at least the standardization does explain why we don't see it solves the issue of why isn't there any historical linguistic drift or sound shifting going on of the names or the not even the names, just even the terms and the untranslated terms that we have. So I think it kind of actually gives insight more than just the Sumerian, right? The exercise was productive in other ways.
Well, as I said, I really do appreciate you coming on, and hopefully this will be useful. Even if it's not going to be like the most accessible at times because it deals with Sumerian and all that fun stuff. But like
and that's the problem.
The book more is like really fruitful. So,
well, that was the problem too. Is how many really even know Sumerian? I mean, it's such a niche. Very few people. That's why honestly, within LDS people, there was only a few that even had taken a course in it or something. So it's like, hey, I'm just sending it out for a third party, and it did go to some people that were pretty knowledgeable. And so I don't think their response was all negative. So, and I mean, the reality is, will we ever know for sure? I don't know, but at least I think it gives a possibility that can explain it. I just don't think, from what the research has been done so far, that this approach of trying to find, and I think it kind of breaks open maybe the other thinking of Hebrew itself, because a lot of people are always looking for, do I find this in the old world? Is this a name in the old world? I'm like, I don't know. They may have made up some other names.
I think one issue. I think one issue
they
there
aren't
is
limited by their brass plates. They could have
yeah.
hey.
I think one issue though is like it's easier to learn Hebrew and related languages than Sumerian because like there's loads of courses on it and it's much more accessible than a language, something that's language nondescript like say Sumerian, or let alone an Semitic language informed by Sumerian like Akkadian. So
yeah, right. So I guess all I'm saying is it is. What I'm saying, I think the approach that I'm saying is even in the Book of Mormon names Hebrew, or if we're looking at biblical Hebrew, maybe we don't have to just like always try to find them in the old world, which is okay. That's people that are trying to prove the Book of Mormon is true want to do that, right? And I'm mostly just like, I just want to understand what's going on in the Book of Mormon, whether it ends up being some apologetic argument. I don't really care, to be honest with you. Sometimes it ends up being that. That's great. Sometimes my research shows that, but that's not my main motive.
And that's all good. But as I said, like really do appreciate like all the work you've done, not just on this, but like your book on say geology and volcanism and other issues as well, like the chronology and calendars. I think that's amongst your best work as well. So, but yeah, again, really do
thanks. And you're very complimentary of you because you're probably the only one that's read all of my stuff.
It's we were kind of
most people say I don't like your stuff. I was like, did you actually read it? Well, no. I mean, I had some comment from somebody that says, I don't believe that. I'm like, well, did you? No, I didn't read it. And I'm like, well, okay. And again, I get it. It's hard. I got 400-page books, but unfortunately, a lot, as you know, and not a lot of things can just be boiled down into a 3-minute YouTube video or a meme.
Unfortunately,
or even an article. Some things are just too involved. You have to lay out large info to.
So many people have TikTok brain where you can't distill in like 10 seconds or you're going to give up. So.
Right.
But we just for the audience, we were half joking when I said to Jerry, I actually have read his book cover to cover on Sumerian names. It's like, okay, so what are these, autism or OCD?
Yeah. Well, I was saying, I like my kids. None of them have read that book. So even people that I might, even pay to do it. In fact, that's why I do paid review, because you send somebody, here's this 800-page book on Sumerian etymology, Book of Mormon names. Will you read it? No one's going to do it unless they're paid. So I actually do paid review of all my books because I know I have to.
Well, if you ever want to pay me to read your books, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll throw you on the list. I mean, I usually pay like $400 or 500. If it's not Sumerian, I would have paid more. But again, I was limited. Who can I even find to read this book?
Yeah.
In my character's book, I did the same, but I actually just had like a Mayan person, Egypt. I mean, I had to like break it up because it actually has multiple languages in it, right? It's like who
Yeah.
who is going to be knowledgeable of Mesoamerican and Egyptian? What scholar out there? Hardly anybody. So anyway, so I sometimes I just say, read this. Could you review this section? Because I know that I wouldn't expect them to know, Demotic or something if they're a Mayanist.
No, fair enough.
Yeah,
But
well,
as I
like
said,
I say, so I guess what we're saying is if they're autistic and OCD, they will really love my books, is what we're saying.
for those who are wondering, it's OCD. I got tested when I was 5. I don't have autism. But yeah.
Okay. So it's highly recommended for that body of subset of LDS people, I suppose.
Whatever helps.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. This is the
I
first
know, my pleasure.
podcast I've
Always
really
good.
done on the book. I've mentioned it in a few other podcasts, like this is an interesting thing, if you want to look at. But so so
Yeah, well,
I'll definitely put a link on my website to this one under the. I think you're the only podcast showing up under this book on my website.
I'll send you the link after this. But yeah, and like when your other stuff drops, maybe we could like hook up again and like do an episode on one of the topics or the book themselves whenever they come out. So, but yeah, again, really do appreciate the time today and everything you've done. And everyone should definitely check out the website, even if you don't want to read the Sumerian book cover to cover. At the very least, read Jerry's book on geology. So.
And there's some short videos there that even on those books, so you can watch a few videos. So.
Well, thanks again, Jerry, for coming on. Really do appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Robert.